Good afternoon. My name's David Savage. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, and this is my 4th summit. We're now going to have a little talk on national security and foreign policy. The name of this next panel is Superpower or Spectator, America's Grand Strategy in the 21st Century. And I'll be honest, I can use a little tutorial on what is America First. If you're like me, in the first month of this administration, you've seen our Vice President travel to the Munich Security Conference and berate our allies as if they are our adversaries. You will recall our President calling the President of Ukraine a dictator, blaming the President of Ukraine for the Russians invading his own country, and now demanding 1/2 of Ukraine's mineral resources. And this week, some of you sports fans may have been watching the international hockey match where the citizens of Canada booed during the American anthem. I'm no expert, but I suggest to you that they were not booing us. They were booing one American. The question is, do we take heart? This happened in 1 month. There are 47 months left in this administration. Moderating our panel and introducing the panelist is Mr. Tom Nichols, a friend of Principles First, 4th time attending the Principles First Summit, an academic specialist on international affairs, a retired professor of the U.S. Naval War College, having dealt with issues on Russia, nuclear weapons, and national security. Tom, would you please introduce our panel and answer one question? What in the hell's going on?
Well, is this, okay, there we go. I'm glad that I have to introduce the panel first so I can stall for time on that question about what the hell's going on, because I'm not sure I have a good answer. So let me start on the far left here with Garry Kasparov. Many of you know that I... Many of you know that I began my career in Soviet and Russian studies, so Gary's name was well known to me a long time ago. I was former Soviet studies majors out there. Thank you. Garry is generally considered one of the best, if not the best, chess player of all time. After his reign as world chess champion, he took it upon himself to challenge Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, running for office, and I'm putting that in air quotes, in 2008 because, needless to say, he did not expect to win. And by 2012, it became clear that he had to leave Russia due to the threat of imminent arrest or worse. He's since become one of the most powerful voices in defense of freedom and against dictators. He is the founder and chairman of the Renewed Democracy Initiative, an organization dedicated to unmasking and confronting the international alliance of dictators and inspiring those of us in the U.S. and in other free countries to value and defend our democracies. They've united 120 dissidents from 40 oppressive countries about how inspirational American democracy can be and how we can actually defend and re-envision it. To my left, although only physically, doesn't matter who's sitting on which side anymore, is, of course, Bill Kristol, who is well known, I think, to everybody in this room. Bill has a long history as a public intellectual and in government service, going back all the way to being chief of staff for Vice President Quayle many years ago in our youths. He is also now heading up the Bulwark, which I know many of you, there you go. You may have heard of it. And also Defending Democracy Together, another organization devoted to trying to get through and to save democracy in this very dark time we live in. So what I'm going to ask is that Garry kicks us off with 5, 6, 7 minutes of trying to answer this question. I will try before I hand it over, and then Bill, and then we will have some discussion among ourselves, and then at the end we'll try and take a few minutes of questions. My short answer is, I think that that what we're living through is a period now of transactionalism and revenge. That we no longer, the United States no longer has a guiding, at least in this administration, no longer has a guiding ideology about foreign policy. Foreign policy is whatever works to the advantage of a particular administration and for the President of the United States. As we're now seeing, I was trying to figure out just as we were coming out, apparently there was some report that the Ukrainians are going to have to accept this mineral deal for further American support. And I had to stop reading because I would like to come out here and not be completely enraged while talking to you. So I think this is the collapse of an American idea, an American ideology, an American view of the world that structured our international relations and made the world a better place to live in, not just for Americans, but for a lot of people. But I have two distinguished guests up here, so I'm going to say that was my short answer to David's question, and I'd like to pass it over to Garry.
Tom, thank you very much. So I think one correction. We are not witnessing the collapse of American idea. We are witnessing the betrayal of American idea. As someone who can speak on behalf of many dissidents who are still seeing America as the beacon of hope and the shining city on the hill, the idea is very much alive. But we are actually seeing an administration that rejected it consciously. So second correction is, there is American foreign policy under Donald Trump, and there is American domestic policy under Donald Trump. And I think very few people recognize the gravity of the situation. We are living in the middle of the coup. It's the debate, often even from this stage, I heard debates whether we are just, making a turn 40 degrees, 50 degrees. No, it's 180. And they have a plan. And let's not celebrate that incompetent people have been nominated and confirmed by the spineless Senate. They are incompetent to run America. They are not incompetent to run Donald Trump's agenda. And as I always said that Vladimir Putin's agenda was not a Russian agenda, Donald Trump's agenda is not an American agenda. But they have a plan, and it's just 1 month into the office. They have been executing it, with a light speed. And I don't think they will ever stop. And third correction is, J.D. Vance did not treat European alleged allies as adversaries. I wasn't in the audience. He didn't even respect them to be adversaries. He treated them, and what he said basically, translating from his, very little diplomacy. But cutting the long story short, he told them suckers and losers. And told them irrelevant. It's not even adversaries. You guys are irrelevant. You don't have a seat at the table. Zelensky also doesn't have to be at the table. It's us and Putin. And again, it's just everything that Donald Trump has been doing, was very consistent. He's playing in the hands of Vladimir Putin. I'm not here to say that whether he's KGB asset or not. I'm not, I don't have, access to secret intelligent information, is so. But what I'm saying is that everything that happens is always, brings us back to Russia. So you look at every political group in Europe they support, they all are, just on the Russian payroll and promoting Russian agenda. Donald Trump's actions always benefit man in Kremlin, not Xi Jinping, not Iranian mullahs. So you can see things, and many of our opponents say, oh, those are coincidences. My response is, I do believe in coincidences, but I also believe in KGB. And I think that American foreign policy now is clearly aimed at changing the world order and helping Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping to go back to the golden era of might is right. So that's why every institution that is still defending the idea of consensus, cooperation, negotiation, rule of law, they're all viewed as enemies. They have to be weakened and ideally destroyed. I see no coincidences and no inconsistency in the attacks on Europe. Tomorrow there's an election in Germany. It's a historic election. And America, both Elon Musk and J.D. Vance, openly supporting the political party, Alternative for Germany, that is, okay, let's probably not use the word neo-Nazi, but it's, it's, I don't know what was right here. But you may say, oh, this is just, it's Germany because they don't like the Social Democrats, they don't like Christian Democrats. But again, it's very consistent. Nigel Farage in Great Britain. And just to give you just, like a purest form, very few know about Romania. I know the country, I visit often. Călin Georgescu is this, it's a product of social media. He's a pure fascist. And nothing else. Even AfD in Germany, I don't know for Germany, you can find some ideas, liberalism. Călin Georgescu promotes Russian agenda. He's paid by Russians, and he is at war with Romanian fascists. Both J.D. Vance and Elon Musk are very much concerned about the freedom of Romanian people to vote for this asshole. Again, it's consistent. What is his program? Take Romania out of European Union. So destroying European Union is at the top in the agenda. And again, we can go from country to country. Austria, Freedom Party, France, Marine Le Pen. Actually, she's probably the best, out of all of them. Yeah, trust me, many of them are much, much worse. So they're very consistent. And of course, Viktor Orban, the Putin's Trojan horse, this is the biggest favorite. This administration decided not to talk to Hungarian opposition, which is, by the way, also right of the center. But Orban is their hero. So do they have a program? Yes, they do have a program. And it's not surprising that they put all the pressure on Ukraine. Of course, it's probably not worth even remembering the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, where under American pressure, Ukraine gave up its nukes, just 1,600 nukes, 1,600. Ukraine had more nukes at the time than China, France, and Britain combined. And we all understand that if they had even a portion of these nukes, there would be no war. But this memorandum also, a part of guaranteeing territorial integrity of Ukraine, also banned from using economic coercion, attacking Ukrainian sovereignty. That's exactly what we're seeing now. This agreement has been, it's a classical colonial agreement, offered by British Empire to a local tribe, a leader somewhere in the middle of Africa. Everything is for us. And it's, you have to pay us. By the way, I'm still curious, what does Ukraine owe to America? We're just hearing all insane numbers. And sometimes I look at the journalists who are interviewing Donald Trump. So, and it's, you guys, that he comes up with numbers that have nothing to do with reality. Can you just ask a question, or you are no longer, believing in elementary decency? 200, 300, 400. We know that the real numbers, they're much lower. Actually, I'm not even sure, who owns who now. Because, by the way, what company benefited most from Ukrainian war? Who is the largest contractor of Pentagon today? Quickly? No, Palantir. Who is the biggest shareholder of Palantir? Peter Thiel. Who is his protege? J.D. Vance. So I think J.D. Vance should shut up, because his donor is the biggest beneficiary of that war. Elon Musk, let's start counting, he's also a big beneficiary. The Starlink had a small portion of internet. Now it's much bigger. So they are beneficiaries of the war, and they're trying to tell us, oh, yeah, let's stop this war. It's not about offering peace. It's, okay, you can definitely stop the war if you capitulate. They're forcing Ukraine to capitulate. They're attacking Zelensky because he's taking stand for his nation. He stayed in Kyiv knowing that if Russians would take in Kyiv, he would be killed. So I think that as of today, we are in a very, very difficult situation because, again, as I said, I was in Munich. Europeans are shocked. Okay, they have their share of blame for being, complacent, for not spending enough. But now, after so many decades of being part of alliance, and by the way, they were faithful members of alliance, they sent troops to Afghanistan. So 1/3 of the victims of casualties in Afghanistan were from Europe. And now is just being attacked. So I think we should accept this harsh reality that America today is playing, when we talk about ice hockey, has changed the teams.
Thank you, Garry. Speaking of, Garry mentioned anniversaries. I'm just going to take a personal moment. My wife's out here somewhere. It's our wedding anniversary today. And I brought her here, which tells you I know how to show a woman a good time. Bill, where are we going?
It tells you that Tom's wife, Lynn, is a saint. Because I offered to bring my wife here, and it's not our anniversary or anything, and she was have a good time, Bill. Really, give my best to Garry and Tom. I think I know what you think about this topic. I have to correct one thing Tom said. He said what did you say? He said I'm heading up the bulwark. Normally, when you're introduced and they exaggerate a little bit your role, if you let it go, right? I mean, never correct an excessively nice introduction. But since Tim Miller and Sarah Longwell are actually here and are on the next panel and are going to ridicule me anyway, whatever happens, I should make clear I'm editor-at-large. It's really been an honor and a pleasure and to be a part of the bulwark. But Jonathan Less, Sarah Longwell, Tim Miller do much more work than I do and have been actually instrumental in its success. And thank you all for those of you who are readers and subscribers and paid subscribers. Many other bulwark commentators here, contributors here. I was talking with Holly Berkeley Fletcher earlier, who does these very bad impressions of Sarah and Tim and me, which you might take a look at that on YouTube and be amused, perhaps. I should also say that I think the term for the AfD in Germany, Garry was saying, how do you say far, far, far right without quite saying neo-Nazi? I've taken to calling them anti-Nazi, which I think is actually what they are, right? We can't be too obsessed with what happened then, and we can't hold anyone responsible for it. There are no lessons to be learned, and we have German history is wonderful, and that was a minor, one of them said this, right, a minor interlude or parenthesis. So, but they are basically neo-fascist. I mean, I do think, just on Garry's point, of people not quite wanting to see what's happening. When Vance endorsed the AfD in Germany and then spoke by video to them, American press took that as if, well, it's a little weird to get involved in the elections of other countries, but, they're kind of conservative, and so they like the Conservative Party. People did not understand how astonishing this was. Marine Le Pen will not sit in the European Parliament with the AfD, because they're such extreme fascists, They're excluded from all governments in Germany by an agreement of all the other parties, who don't love each other, the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats and the Greens, because they understand that you need to keep this barrier up, especially in Germany, but elsewhere as well, incidentally. And so it's very, very telling that both Vance and Musk, and again, they could have, from our point of view, they could have said a sentence or two that would have been nice, and I would have been very offended and objected. They went out of their way to endorse the party, not to say people should be a little nicer to the party, to endorse it. And Musk did a video, right, to one of their rallies. I mean, one has to really appreciate how shocking that is, but it is what they are. What's the session? At some point, believe when people tell you what they are. Was that Maya Angelou? You should believe them. I mean, this is very true, very important. I think for Trump's such a goofball in certain ways, and a con man, and a liar, and everything else, that you tend to discount a lot of what he says, and there's some truth to that, I think. I think Musk and Vance are much more purposeful in their, let's say, true kind of quasi-fascism, whereas Trump is more of, I don't know quite what, a con man on top of a fascist movement or something like that, but quasi-fascist movement. But it's really, you do have to believe what's going on. So it's always good to be on a panel with Garry. I'd also just say that normally I'm the most alarmed person on a panel, the most worried. And, you know, everyone says afterwards, Bill, you went a little too far. But it's always good to have Garry here because I can be like 1 degree less alarmed than him, you know, which is all I am. Very briefly, things are really bad. I very much agree with that, abroad and at home. And for a while, about 2 weeks ago, I was saying the international order is more delicate, more fragile than the domestic order. We've had 200 years here. We have all these institutions. There's a certain infrastructure here that makes it a little harder to destroy everything or corrupt everything or take over and seize everything than is the case in Hungary, right, or in Romania or elsewhere. Whereas the international order is always fragile. They don't, you know, it's a bunch of agreements between nation states, basically, and norms and practices, and it's been an amazing 80 years of the liberal international order, but I've always thought that was more at risk. But actually now I think both are almost equally at risk. The domestic order of liberal democracy and the international order, which has produced, for all of its limitations and flaws, 80 years of relative peace, relative spread of freedom, and of course, relative prosperity. So I'm almost equally alarmed about the international situation and the domestic situation. Just on the domestic situation for just one minute, the degree to which, if you were a political scientist, and I once was a little bit, if you came down from Mars and looked at this, you would say, this is totally explicable. They're taking over. This guy took over. He won the first time he was constrained, didn't know what he wanted to do. The establishment constrained him some. The lesson he learned from that was, if I go in again, I'm not getting constrained. It was, he lost the election. He couldn't quite overturn it. People deserted him, from Pence on down through Bill Barr and Mark Milley and others, right? And I'm not letting that happen again. And so here he is, reelected, very unfortunately, obviously, as president. And he's determined to take control of the power agencies, install loyalists at the top of them. If they're not, probably better marginally for him if they're sort of competent, but actually it's good if they're not too competent either, because then they're even more dependent on his well-being, his defense, his well-being. They'll take orders from the White House. So look at what you've got. Look at the Defense Department, especially after last night. Look at the Justice Department. Look at the FBI. Look at national intelligence. And you've got weak, very weak, unqualified leaders who will do what he wants and will be pretty good at one thing, insisting on loyalty to Trump. And even last night, the press coverage is ridiculous. Shake up at the Pentagon, or, well, gee, what was the problem with C.Q. Brown? Why did he dislike him? There was no problem. The guy's extremely well thought of. Incredible slander to call him a DEI hire, incidentally. Trump wants to make the point that he can fire anyone at will, and he will do so, and they're there at his sufferance, and he's going to bring in someone who's a 3-star, retired, maybe he's a fine man, a fine military officer, and he could well be, incidentally, but you know, he's there because Trump wanted him there. No one thought, well, gee, he's next in line. Mark Milley, who, have you heard from him yet? I lost track of the schedule. But I mean, Mark Milley had been chief of staff of the Army, right? He had his own support base, as it were. It wasn't quite that easy to boss him around. It wouldn't have been easy to fire him in November or December of 2020 because everyone knew him, respected him. The other chiefs would have quit. There would have been many connections in the national security establishment. Trump wants to bring in someone who is not like that. Trump wants to bring in someone who everyone says, well, who is he? And then it turns out he has some connections with Jared Kushner's brother and with Teal World in Silicon Valley. That's all nice, too. But the point is, he wants to bring in people who will do what he wants. He wants to fire anyone or not have anyone in an important position who has his own standing, his or her own standing, his or her own, any possible ability of standing up to him. So it's very ominous if you look at justice and the FBI, if you look at defense, if you look at the national security agencies, I think. And then, of course, he fires the JAGs. I mean, which was, of course, paragraph 19 or something in the New York Times article. But they are the ones who will get asked if an order comes down from Trump, is this a lawful order? And anyone from a general to a private, right, could ask that question. And to one of the JAGs, not to the top JAG. And the 3 who are there now are going to be hired by Hegseth, and they're by secretaries of the services following Hegseth's directions. And there are going to be people who are going to say whatever Trump does is fine, right? So the degree to which having personal loyalists to Trump, it's not a question of are they right-wing, do they understand the America First agenda? Some of the coverage of that was ridiculous too. CQ Brown may not have been on board the America First agenda. That's not the issue. The issue is he would not do some of the things that Trump wanted him to do, as Milley wouldn't. And Trump thinks that with Hegseth there and someone who does not have his own base really of authority, you might say, in Washington, he can get stuff done. So it's very dangerous at home. And there is a Congress, used to have this thing called the Congress. I think it's in Article 1 of the Constitution. You remember the Constitution? The conservative think tanks in Washington used to hand out these little pocket constitutions, you know. I think I have a few lying around the house. I can't really stand having them there because, the think tank has its name on the cover, and now they've all betrayed it mostly, so the conservative ones, and so, not all of them, but mostly. But yeah, Article 1 of the Constitution is the Congress, right? Now, the Republicans control the Congress, so you can't ask for too much, but maybe 4 Republican senators could occasionally look beyond their fear of Trump. Maybe even the Democrats, honestly, could do a little more to push their Republican colleagues. Anyway, we'll see if that happens a little bit. But so far, the courts are doing some things, but you can't count on them ultimately. It's just too hard, I think. And of course, Trump will be making a lot of court appointments over the next 4 years, confirmed by the Republican Senate. So I'm very worried, very alarmed here at home. And I think it's right. If you look at the forest, not the trees, I think it's a helpful way of trying to get a grasp of what's happening. And it's less about these individual personalities and who's being. My friend Bob Kagan said to me this morning, we were talking about hiring this guy Kane, and he said, look, the point isn't the hirings, the point is the firings. The point is making the point that you are all there at Trump's personal sufferance. And was it a long-time norm that you don't fire the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, you don't fire generals, unless there's really cause or a crisis or a reason you have to? You don't just do it when you come in. You don't fire Jags. Who's ever heard of such a thing, incidentally, to take over, you know? He's doing it to make that point. Second, very, very briefly, there are some, I think, reasons for hope. I mean, I do think the agenda is increasingly unpopular at home. The firing, they've talked themselves into believing that everyone hates civil servants, which isn't really true, and that they have no political support for being unfairly fired and harassed. Same with the military, incidentally, I think. And so I think there's increasing rumblings of discontent. You see that a little in the polls. On the international side, I mean, I hate to say this because God, I hope, things don't go terribly for Ukraine and for everyone else, but his policies are not going to work. Ultimately. And so Justice Chamberlain's didn't and Justice others didn't. So there'll be evidence that it's not working well, both here at home and abroad. And I think people are seeing that a little bit increasingly. So I think his popular support may go down some, and I think might be okay for the 2026 elections, if we have elections that are not, we will have elections, I think, but will they be totally fair, free, no Elon Musk putting his thumb on the scale in terms of not just social media, but in terms of law enforcement operations in key states and so forth. People need to be worried about that too. But I think his popularity will go down some. But third and final point, what worries me the most is how should I put it, the resistance will rise, but can it rise fast enough to keep up with the damage and destruction he's doing? And I don't know. I mean, I worry that it can't. And also, once you destroy certain things, it's just hard to put them back. So everyone can look up 3 years from now and say, whoa, man, that's really kind of bad, the situation we're now in. And the number of retirements we're going to have, incidentally, from important parts of the U.S. government, including the military, I fear. The number of people who will come in because they like this agenda and they like this way of doing business. I was talking with a young military veteran just now. I mean, if the military becomes a place where the rules of the law, the war crimes are not punished, where all matter of rule following and law abiding is discredited as not manly and not tough, and we're warriors here, and all that stuff. What kind of people are we going to attract to the military? And what kind of people are going to leave the military? And I'm a hawk. I'm for a tough military, don't get me wrong. I have a huge admiration for the people in the military. Maybe they can withstand all this, but I think the damage that can be done, both immediately sort of first-order effects, but also the second and third-order effects of 4 years of this is very, very alarming. And even if as the American public wakes up to that damage, I worry that it's going to be very hard to fix it or to rebuild from it. But that's what we'll have to do.
Thanks, Phil. Well, as you can see, I was asked to moderate a panel, but I said with me and Bill and Garry on a panel, there's not going to be a lot of moderation. There's going to be a lot of alarm and concern. And let me kind of bat cleanup here for a moment, pull out a couple of things that that Bill and Garry brought up that are true, about which I'm alarmed. I think Garry put it as starkly as possible. The United States has changed teams. And I find that just astonishing. The United States stands at the head of an alliance of 32 democracies, the most powerful military alliance in the history of mankind, bound together as much by common interest as by common belief. A remarkable achievement. And in the space of one election, we are now, I keep watching the negotiations that Trump keeps inserting himself into about Ukraine. And what occurs to me is that the American president is constantly trying to figure out how to terminate this on terms that Russia wants, which I simply cannot get my head around. And I don't think you have, I'm an old, I was a young Reaganite, now I'm an old Reaganite. But, you don't have to be a Reaganite, you don't have to be a Scoop Jackson Democrat. You can be astonished that the United States is basically trying to run interference for one of the most dangerous war criminals of the 21st century in the Kremlin. I wanted to pick up on something Bill said that has been really, sticking in my teeth, which is kind of the way I write about everything. There's always a pebble in my shoe and something pissing me off, and all you people should get off my lawn. But the notion of anti-Nazis, this is incredibly dangerous because it seems like there's a generation of young, I don't want to call them conservatives, Trumpists, MAGA folks, whatever they are, who are so deeply nihilistic and unserious that they say, well, I'm against, of course, nobody likes Nazis, but I'm against the people that seem to be really against Nazis because they just go too far. When Bill and I first started meeting, with other Never Trump folks, years ago in the basement of a building where we kept it a secret, for some years while we all sat around saying, "Holy crap, what do we do now?" But one of the things that came up was that we were constantly being chided by anti-Trumpers, and say, I like the people who begin every sentence with, "I'm no Trump fan, but," right? "I'm not an admirer of Nazis, but," as we all know, everything that comes after the "but" is basically bullshit. And I'm really astonished by this because I don't feel like the debates that we need to have about things like foreign policy are conducted with any seriousness. There's a kind of, the people that you're trying to talk to about this, even Vance, who, seems to know what he's doing when it comes to TL and Musk and the rest of these guys, who seems more purposeful than Trump, who, again, is kind of a goldfish and darts from, food pellet to food pellet. But even there's kind of this smirky, I'm just asking questions, unseriousness. And I think part of what is really endangering us is that no one has really thought through the consequences of the world order changing in a way that we could not imagine for 80 years. They just don't, they think it's a TV show and that they're going to win cash and prizes, but that the producer, before things get too out of control, the producers will step in and make sure it doesn't go off the rails. And they don't understand. And it shows that they don't understand it when you put somebody like Pete Hegseth in the Defense Department, that the people they're dealing with, the kind of people that would have gone after Garry in Russia, these are serious and dangerous people who know what they're doing. These people are as serious as a heart attack. And the idea that somehow we're going to deal with them by, having Pete Hegseth call his opposite number in Moscow is laughable not only to me, but to them. And I don't understand. Before I turn it back to Garry and Bill for more comment, because I'm sorry, there's so many of you, so I think we're just going to leave it as a discussion amongst ourselves. But many of you have asked, how do I explain this to my friends back home about why foreign policy matters? You know, you three guys are up there and you're all bitched out about NATO and Ukraine and all these things. But does that really matter? How do you, the guy in the diner who says, Ukraine. I think this goes back to the problem that no one is really thinking through what it looks like for the average American if we start living by rules that are written in Beijing and Moscow. If people really want to understand how serious this is, wait until the first time that the transit of goods and people and money and services across the world is controlled not in Washington or Brussels, but in Beijing or Moscow. The first time that the Chinese decide, for example, that we've displeased them and they engineer a supply chain crisis just because they can. I think people don't understand that our alliances, our commitment to democracy, our commitment to maintaining a stable and liberal, small L liberal international order, their standard of living, and yes, sometimes their very lives depend on it. And so when your friends ask you, why do you care about this? I think the right answer is, because I think it's important to be able to buy medicine when I need it, or to travel to a foreign country and have my passport matter. Or to say that, I can go from one point to another point without my airplane being diverted and being, pulled off of a 777. Anyway, that's my alarmed freak out. So I want to come back to Garry and to Bill. And Garry, I'll start with you. I think people are having a hard time envisioning this, so I'm going to ask you your vision of it. What does it look like if Ukraine loses? Now that America has switched sides and we're pressuring the Ukrainians, what does a loss look like? And what does the world look like for them and for us in a new world where the Ukrainians have been defeated and Ukraine's been partitioned? And what else do you think would happen?
Yeah. Actually, Tom, I think that everything that comes before but is bullshit.
What's that?
Everything that comes before but is bullshit. Ukraine loses, that means Russia wins, Putin wins. So there are obviously some grades of Putin's victory, but let's say he keeps even the territories that he controls now. Even these territories. Now, then next question is whether these territorial gains will be recognized. I doubt very much that Trump can force even this Senate to recognize them, but he doesn't have to. One of the provisions of this colonial agreement he's forcing upon Ukraine implies that American companies can operate on the occupied territories, which will be equal to recognition. So the victory will save Putin from disaster because Russian economy is on the verge of collapse now. He can't continue the war for more than a year. Now, it's as every economist who's analyzing the data can tell you that Russia, and it's even if there are no more sanctions imposed, and there's so many ways, that you can basically force Russian economy into collapse much sooner. And it will dramatically raise his international status. He will be back in business. Even if he's not joining G7, I think it's impossible because Europeans will not do that. That means the end of G7. That means the end of NATO. And we'll see what happens with the European Union. Probably it will also collapse. There will be probably, very likely, a new defense alliance in the eastern border of European Union, northeastern bloc, so the Baltic nations, Poles, probably Czechs, Finland, Sweden. I guess, the Britain may join. The Europeans already discussed whether the British and French nukes would offer sufficient deterrence against Russia. That's a discussion that took place 10 days ago, actually a week ago in Munich. They're not so sure yet, but they may have no chance. And Putin will continue the policy of I think, more like a hybrid war. Because there's also a myth, there's this, as Trump said, oh, if Putin wanted, he would have taken hold of Ukraine. Yes, Putin wanted to take hold of Ukraine. Yeah, again, I'm not telling you that Putin's plan was to take Ukraine. He has been saying it. I mean, you don't have to, to invent things. Simply listen. People always ask me, how did you know that Putin will do this or that? I said, I listened to him. Because, dictators, they always lie about what they have done, but very often they tell you exactly what they're going to do. Mein Kampf was published in 1925 and it was a blueprint. But in 1925, Hitler was nobody. I mean, the leader of the small nationalistic party, Putin, when he said in 2005, on April 25th, 2005, for speaking before Russian Duma and Russian Senate, the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. He was already president of Russia. He was already commanding massive resources, both military and economic and financial, of course. So Putin was never secretive about his plans. You cannot blame him for hiding it. So Russian propaganda for 24/7 saying Ukraine as a state doesn't exist. Ukrainian nation doesn't exist. I'm not telling you. They have been saying that. And pretending you don't hear that, I mean, okay, it's just, we're not idiots. So that's why ending the war on Putin terms means that he will continue his policy of destruction of Ukraine. And then hybrid war means that he'll start putting pressure. He doesn't have to attack Baltic nations or Poland, but he can continue doing what he has been doing for a long time, buying influence. There's so many political parties in Europe on his payroll, and there will be more pressure. And, these small nations will have to deal with Putin, knowing that America is no longer playing, on their side, but on the other side. So, again, we are entering the world that some say it's Yalta 1945. But I was not happy with the outcome of Yalta. I think Roosevelt could have been probably more assertive, following Churchill, not Stalin. But in 1945, in March 1945, Stalin already had 10 million Russian soldiers, Soviet soldiers, occupying most of Eastern Europe. Vladimir Putin doesn't have it. It's not even Munich 1938. Neville Chamberlain was not planning to do business with Hitler. He tried, he was naive, he was wrong, but he tried to buy peace by making concessions, not dividing Europe with Hitler. Now we are dealing with a dictator who is weak, who is on the verge of defeat, who is in Chinese pocket, and they want to give everything to Putin even without even being forced, without even starting negotiating. They're already conceding everything. So the consequences could go beyond our imagination. First, Taiwan is already gone. If there's no question about it. Chinese now, they're having military drills 400 miles away from Australia. Just as of today. So I guess we will live in a world where call it Kissinger Triangle, Moscow, Beijing, Washington, and the rest will be absolutely irrelevant.
Boy, am I sorry I asked that question, but and I didn't. And I didn't raise the issue of Taiwan because there are only so many nightmares we can take in one afternoon, but I wondered about that as well, the ramifications for the breakdown of a global order. Bill, if I'm an uncommitted voter, a reasonably good-natured, I'm not wearing a red hat in a diner in Pennsylvania, I'm just a guy who stops you on the street and says, hey, you're Bill Kristol. Why do I care if Ukraine loses? I'm tired of this. Right? I'm weary of it. It's been 3 years and all I hear about is Ukraine, and this is clearly something that a lot of Americans don't want to have anything to do with. Why should I care?
I mean, I'm not the right person to give that answer since I've been not correct or unsuccessful in persuading Americans of a lot of things in the last bunch of years. And I honestly, I think there are practical, God knows there are practical repercussions. One thing that Garry, just to dot one last thing he said, I mean, the idea that, incidentally, the whole West is going to stay firm without U.S. leadership and with Putin triumphant, I think, is false. The AfD could be running Germany in 5 years if Putin wins in Ukraine. Why not? If you're in Germany, they have a recession. The U.S. is discredited. We're not very useful. In fact, we're putting tariffs on them. Putin funds the AfD even more. I mean, the degree of collapse of liberal democracy around the world could be pretty astonishing. And incidentally, we're not immune from that. Maybe you haven't noticed. It's already collapsing, or it's already under attack here. And what happens in 2028 in a U.S. election? Maybe there's a reaction against Trump. Maybe it's more like, okay, it's a new world, and we got to keep down this path, and we can't be picking fights with stronger countries than us and with China. I think the degree to which things could collapse is really awful. Do voters understand that compared to, allegedly all these kitchen table issues? I got to think Americans do have some sense of that after the first half of the 20th century and then the subsequent 80 years. I don't know. So other people, I'll let Tim and Sarah explain on the next panel what you should, Sarah especially, what you should say to actual voters. I do think the policies won't work well in the short, medium term, even though, for the U.S. So I think there are opportunities for voters. I'm just going to make one very quick point, literally 1 minute. In 1975, I was a grad student at Harvard, a Scoop Jackson Democrat. I was walking across Harvard Yard, I think it was April 30th, 1975, with my friend Steve Rosen, who ended up being a colleague of Tom's at the Naval War College, another Scoop Jackson Democrat. And we were incredibly depressed because Vietnam had fallen. We had refused to provide aid to the South Vietnamese, who we had pulled out 2.5 years before, obviously, who wanted to fight. The Congress wouldn't let Ford provide aid. The boat people were beginning to take off. Cambodia was about to become a killing field. And I thought, oh my God, this is the America. What's the consequence of this going to be? The next 4 or 5 years were bad, culminating, I suppose, in Iran and the terrible revolution there, which we're still paying a huge price for, and God knows the Iranian people are. But 10 years after that, 15 years after we were walking across Harvard Yard, and 10 years after the Iranian revolution in '79, the Berlin Wall falls, and the Soviet Union collapses in '91. So things can change a little faster than you think. History is less inevitable, less unidirectional than you think. Things tend to go slowly until they go very quickly. And I think we're now in a new moment. We are in a moment where things are moving very fast, which is very dangerous, but may provide some real opportunities. There could be an inflection point, and hopefully it's not too horrible in terms of deaths and destruction overseas or damage here, where people look up and say, oh my God. You could have, 1938 and 39 was followed by 1940, and Chamberlain was forced out, and Churchill was able to stand alone for 1.5 years, much as we Americans love our own role, and we should be proud of what we did in World War II. For 1.5 years, at least we were able to help Britain. That, of course, is different from I was thinking about that. What would have happened in 1940 if Charles Lindbergh had been president and not FDR? No Lend-Lease. Churchill has a very tough time hanging on. Still, Churchill hung on. Britain hung on with the Commonwealth for 1.5 years. We get attacked and things change. So history can reverse itself faster than one thinks. One hopes that we don't need to have actual disasters happening for us to be able to reverse course.
Go ahead, Garry. You want to get one last?
I hate contradicting you, Bill, but I think any comparison to 1975 doesn't fly. So you had, 1976
Garry,
elections.
You just stepped on the mic point, which is I love 1975 as an analogy.
Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter. This is in 2024. I describe the American elections as fight between losers and traitors, and of course, losers lost.
All right, well, Bill tried to leave us on a hopeful note, so I'm going to emphasize that because while the historical analogy to 75 may not be great, I was just behind you a few years in college and a little younger than you, but it's really important to remember this. 1975, Gerald Ford goes to Brussels and he pleads with NATO to stay together. Pleads with them, says, look, I know things are bad, and I know the United States is run by an unelected president and an unelected vice president, and the oil shocks and inflation and all, and so please stay together. Imagine this, an American president pleading with NATO to stay together at a time that a few years later when I start college, I'm told in college, the American system is eventually going to converge to be more like the Soviet system. They're winning. That was the message of the late 1970s. They're winning. The Soviets, as using terms Garry knows well, they said the correlation of forces is turning in our favor. The Americans have been chased out of Vietnam. They're a paper tiger. Our economy was a wreck. We were, disco. It was just a nightmare from which we could not awaken. And as Bill points out, 10 years later, by 1985, and even before the Berlin Wall falls, we're the world has changed again, and NATO is stronger than ever. The Soviets are the ones kind of pacing and saying, how did we do this to ourselves? We're hated, we don't believe in our own system. So I guess what I want to finish us with here is, yes, it's dark right now. Yes, the metaphor of Churchill has been on my mind a lot. I feel that I watch Darkest Hour, and I can't tell if I'm watching it to be encouraged or preparing myself for the worst. But there is reason to be hopeful, because we, that is the people who believe in democracy, people who believe in liberal order, people who believe in human freedom, we're on the right side of things.
Just one sentence, though, since all these darkness metaphors, my favorite politician after Scoop Jackson, John McCain, used to love to say that it's always darkest before it turns pitch black.
Thank you. Please thank Bill and Garry.